What's that old adage, the two things that you shouldn't talk about in polite conversation? Religion and politics. Well, try telling that to Bill Blaikie, because Bill doesn't just talk about religion and politics, he lives it.
We all bring our fundamental beliefs, or at least we should, to our political decision-making.
The way Bill sees it, his political life is an extension of his Christian faith. How? Well, Bill is an ordained United Church minister, grew up in the working-class suburb in Winnipeg, and spent a couple of years serving the community in the city's north end. Now, he was first elected to Parliament in 1979 and was re-elected another 8 times. In all, Bill spent 29 years in the House with his party of choice, your New Democratic Party. Now, he left the NDP and, the federal politics in 2008. And since retiring, he's turned his attention to a new book. It's called the Blakey Report, and among other things, it tells the story of Canada's Christian left and the NDP's roots in what's called the social gospel, the idea that Christian ethics can provide solutions for social problems, poverty, and the environment.
It's a false separation to suggest that some people bring religion in this pejorative way to their politics and others don't.
Bill believes faith is still relevant in today's political arena, but what about the other argument, the one that says we'd be better off if we kept religion out of politics?
Please welcome to the show, Bill Blaikie.
Hey, man.
Good to be back.
See you.
Yeah,
how are you? Very good. Thank you.
Have a seat. Welcome back, sir.
Yeah, it's been 4 years.
It's been a few years, absolutely. Yeah. I love this. First of all, the Blakey Report. I like it so official. But it's an insider's look at faith and politics. Why did you write the book? Like now?
Well, in part, I wanted to write a memoir while I still remembered, and secondly, there's a lot has happened in the interface between faith and politics over the last 35 years that I thought I had experienced directly, and indirectly, of course, and I wanted to put my thoughts down about what's happened over those 3 decades that I was in federal politics.
What's been the biggest change?
Well, I start off with the story about when I was first elected in 1979. There was 4 clergy in the NDP caucus. I went on a tour of the country with Father Bob Ogle from Saskatoon. The headlines, though they were small, often said, the God Squad's in town, that sort of thing. And reflecting on the nature of the way we were perceived at the time, somewhat affectionately, as sort of, perhaps a bit idealistic people who, but nevertheless, spoke to our better angels. And 30 years later, after the culture wars and the rise of the religious right, allied with the political right, people might say the God Squad's in town with an entirely different feeling in their voice, more derisive, more sort of critical and negatives. You get to the point where people think if you're religious and you're political, you must be on the political right.
Well, it's because it's really come down to 2 issues, right? I mean, ultimately, you hear it in campaigns all the time, it's gay rights and it's abortion. It's same-sex marriage and it's abortion. That's what has become the religious conversation almost.
Well, that's become the religious conversation there.
Yeah.
I think that there's signs that there's a younger generation within that community who want to move beyond.
Yeah, the evangelicals have changed with generation,
who want to move beyond that small, subset of issues, and as they begin to address issues of poverty or AIDS in Africa or the environment, they're going to start to ask those kind of structural questions about why is this so hard? Whose interests, are getting in the way of us actually saving the planet or doing something about poverty?
Like 10 years ago, if a New Democrat, or even like 6 years ago, a New Democrat politician comes up and says, listen, Christianity, the party of God, in a way, that would get a lot of the traditional New Democratic voters a bit, it would certainly catch their attention. Were you educating your own party? Were you talking to them about the role that you think faith can play in politics, in your political point of view?
Well, one of the things I think people need to realize about the NDP, and this is something that got eclipsed or overwhelmed by the dominant paradigm that the relationship between politics and religion is something that happens on the political right, is that there have always been people of faith, not just Christians, but people from all faith traditions in the NDP. And it's one of the reasons why with the encouragement of Jack Layton some years ago, we formed the Faith and Justice Commission of the party so that we could say to Canadians who were paying attention that, if you're religious, the NDP is a place where you can be that way. It's not It's not something that's forbidden. In fact, it's one of the traditions of the party.
I jokingly on my Twitter page, whenever instead of me saying thank God about something, I say thank Dawkins. I think it's funny to say thank Dawkins, right? And the moment I do that, there's this incredible discussion that takes its own, it has its own momentum about that, because Dawkins has also become one of the more outspoken people representing science and representing atheists. Here's a clip from Dawkins here.
I do think that faith, unsupported by evidence, is a lethal weapon. Well, it doesn't have to be, of course it doesn't have to be, but it can be. It's a weapon because possibly unscrupulous people can get hold of often young men and use them as weapons, use them as human bombs. The point is that they do believe that it is the will of God that they should detonate themselves and blow up a busload of people or blow up a skyscraper in New York.
Dawkins is the leader of a pretty significant group of people who think that religion, faith is dangerous in politics because it can lead to that.
And I don't think you fight that. I agree with him that that kind of religion is dangerous, but I don't think you fight that by criticizing religion in general. I think you do it by acknowledging that religion can also be something else, that it has been something else. There are many people of faith who are conscientious objectors, who believe that their faith instructs them to never kill under any circumstances. So, you know, I mean, there's such a thing as, you know, atheist arguments unsupported by evidence or supported by selective evidence. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a whole other dimension of the debate, this sort of new militant atheism, you know, with Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins and others, and the relationship between the sort of secular, pluralist, multicultural reality that we're in. That's another challenge, I think, for people of faith in the public square, to know how to speak without thinking that, you know, without speaking with the kind of authority that used to be there when you were Christendom. You know, we're now in a post-Christendom reality. Christians have to be humble, but they also have to be part of the discussion, particularly those on the left, because those on the right have been part of the discussion for some time now. But we're not in a post-religious context. If you look at, you know, for every book that says God is not great, there's a book that says God is back, or you know, God's century, the 21st century, or whatever. We live in a very religious reality. I mean, the secular narrative has not worked out the way people thought it was going to in the 1960s. So we need to know how to talk about that elephant in the room. And I see my role as, to whatever extent possible, helping us to have that kind of conversation.
Was it a welcome change? Was it something you were looking forward to? Because I imagine when something is such a big part of your daily life and your identity for so long, and then to wake up one day and go, okay, well, I guess there's something new now.
Well, you know, 32 years of it. So yeah, every once in a while, I try not to watch Question Period too often, because it gives me Question Period envy or something. I mean, you know.
As opposed to Question Period anxiety, that's good.
You know, if I was there, I would be saying this. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I try not to torture myself that way.
Do you place calls to go, listen, this is how you got to?
I try not to bother the existing folks, because I know what it was like. Sometimes we had retired people who were always calling us to say, how come you didn't say this, or how come? And often we had, because, you know, we're dependent on what the media reports. You know, you can say all kinds of things, but if the media doesn't report it, if it's not on the national or whatever, then people think you didn't say it. So I just, you know, if I called, I wouldn't call to say, how come you didn't say it? I say, did you say this, and was it not reported?
What do you do then? You know, so much was talked about how, obviously, the work that you and longtime NDPers and Jack Layton put in helped pull off this massive, you know, swell during this thing. But now that everybody really did point to Jack in a lot of ways for winning over the province of Quebec. Now that Jack's gone, and what do you think the NDP is going to have to do to maintain the kind of momentum that they had sort of built up?
Well, I mean, I think in part, of course, that'll be up to the new leader, but it's also those 59 Quebec MPs have a responsibility, which I think they will execute to the best of their ability. They're going to have to, if they want to be re-elected, presumably most of them do, even though many of them didn't expect to be elected.
Many of them didn't even go to their constituencies, man.
Yeah, you know, and every time there's a sweep like that, either regionally or nationally, that's always been the case in Canadian politics. But we know they're not there because they're opportunists. So they're there for presumably for good reasons, and so I think there's big shoes to fill, but there's a whole bunch more people on board to help fill those shoes, but it doesn't take away from the tragedy of Jack's death, both the personal and for the party, but I think for the country, because I think he had stood a very good chance of being the Prime Minister 4 years from now, and we're never going to get to know what that would be like.
Really an interesting read. You got to check it out. It's the Blakey Report, an insider's look at faith and politics. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
All right.
Thank you so much. Bill Blaikie, everybody.